On today's episode of Watching the Watchers, we're taking a deep dive into some criminal justice news. New poll came out from Yahoo that is showing that many American adults are growing more concerned about crime. We've been spending some time on this channel talking about this crime wave that is working its way through America, and now it's being reflected in the polls. We're seeing that mayors, governors, and other bureaucrats throughout America are starting to sort of raise the red flag on this, and we're going to check in on the numbers. Then we're going to take a look at a town hall that took place Friday night last week that was between representatives that we've talked about here on this channel. We have AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Jamaal Bowman. Both of them had a town hall where they were talking about criminal justice reform and justice solutions, and they both kind of doubled down on the Defund the Police movement, which we've all been hearing a lot about lately. So we're going to check in with them. We've got a couple clips. They're explaining what they think is the appropriate solution here, and we want to hear what they have to say. Obviously, they're very vocal people on their side of the party, and their opinions certainly carry some weight. Then we're going to talk about some other solutions that are underway. There was a new report that came out from the Inspector General that was doing sort of an audit on the Justice Department, inquiring a little bit here and there about what some solutions might be for policing, for a lot of the issues that we see as it relates to law enforcement. How can we solve some of those things? We've heard a lot of different ideas. One of those ideas has been body cameras, right? If there's more accountability, if we can see what these officers are doing, maybe there's less room for sort of fibbing around the margins. Maybe there is sort of a disincentive to doing some of the bad things because everybody knows they're being recorded. And it also protects the officers, right? If an officer says, no, I didn't do anything wrong, they're making that up, a body camera could easily support that officer's claim. It sounds sort of like a no-brainer. Well, not really. When we're talking about the Justice Department and government in general, everything sort of takes a lot of effort. So even though the year is 2021, we're still lacking body cameras for many of our federal agents. And so we're going to take a look at an article detailing why that is. In other justice news, of course, last week we knew that Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison, and the Attorney General from Minnesota came out, Keith Ellison, and he came out with a new statement. He says, listen, this is just the first step on the road to real justice, and we need to do more work. There's a lot more that needs to be done. So now he's calling for the passing of a bill that was introduced by other representatives and senators to reform policing. Of course, we're talking about the George Floyd reform bill that President Biden talked a lot about, said that he wanted something on his desk by May 25th, 2021, 1 year after the George Floyd's incident, after George Floyd was killed. And that didn't happen. We're almost in July now, and we're still lacking a bill. So we've got a lot to get into today. I want to thank you for being here, invite you to subscribe, leave a comment, and encourage you to check out some of the other links, some of the other descriptions that you'll see down below, some other links in the descriptions down below. I'm talking about going over to our other channels. I have a crypto channel and another channel that I use to talk about Arizona law. I'm a lawyer here at the R&R Law Group, and so we've got a lot of videos and a lot of helpful information down in the description below, as well as a separate platform called Locals, where we do other fun things. And I just wanted to throw out quickly that we had a monthly meetup on Saturday where we got together as a community over on Locals. We all met up via Zoom, and some people had their cameras on, some people had their cameras off. No big deal. I had mine on, of course. And we were talking about sort of some of the things that are happening around the world and in people's lives. We heard from some people that have been through the justice system. We've heard from some people who have questions about the justice system. We had a gentleman from the Czech Republic who was asking us as Americans, hey, what do you think about the police? Are you scared of the police? Because in Europe, and in his part of the world, what they're hearing on the media is that everywhere we turn, we're sort of under this totalitarian, brutalist dictatorship regime. And we've got to be concerned that, you know, the police are going to be murdering us everywhere we turn. And we were all on the Zoom going, no, we're not scared of the police at all. You know, and everybody was actually shaking their head, and of course, I made the comment, of course, that I'm not particularly comfortable with a police officer driving behind me. Okay, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I still don't like that, right? Hey, what are they doing back there? What are they going to try to get me for on this one, right? So, there's a difference between, that, I think, reasonable anxiety and some some sort of overarching persistent fear. And so we got to have those conversations, right? It's very interesting to hear what other people hear about what's taking place in America. We had a fireman on there. Thank you, sir. We had a former police officer on there. We might have had an undercover police officer on there. I think I saw a uniform, but I didn't see a face, so maybe the FBI's in there. I don't know. My point is we had a lot of fun, and we do that because we're creating a little bit of a community over there called watchingthewatchers.locals.com. So it was a lot of fun, and I appreciate everybody who was there. We're going to do them every single month as long as you're getting some value out of them, and we're carrying on these good conversations. It's been really great to sort of meet people, put names to faces, and we bump into each other on Twitter. And it's just kind of fun to connect. And so I really appreciated everybody. Thank you to those of you who showed up. I thought it was a lot of fun. I hope to see you on the next one. And another little quick news update or a little show update. Today, of course, this is being recorded because we had our quarterly meetings where we have to sort of, make sure that the firm is humming along quite nicely. And so myself and my business partner today met with some of the firm directors, some of the leaders of our team, and we just sort of do this every quarter. Today, of course, we're screeching into the end of quarter 2, launching into quarter 3, and so we had to get those done. And I actually enjoy meeting with my team. Obviously, we have good conversations. Sometimes, though, they just go a little bit long because we're talking about all these things that we all want to do and all the fun stuff that we're doing at the firm to help other people. And so today, the time got behind a little bit. I just lost track of my time a little bit. Was not prepared and prepped to go live on Monday, 6/28, but we're going to record it anyways. We're doing that right now. Thank you for understanding all of that. All right, so I want to go back into the news of the day, and let's get started by taking a quick look at some of these numbers, some of these polls. Yahoo News says that Biden's approval rating falls as both Republicans and Democrats grow more concerned about crime. So this article written here by Andrew Romano, West Coast correspondent over at Yahoo News, says rising worries about crime among both Democrats and Republicans are making a drag on Biden's approvals rating, saying that is going downhill ahead of the 2022 midterm election. So there was a survey, 1,592 adults conducted from June 22 to June 24, so fairly recent, found that a significant majority, 55%, now describe, quote, violent crime as a, quote, very big problem in the United States. Far more than those who check that degree of concern for the coronavirus pandemic, which is down to 36%, and race relations down to 39%, and the economy, 41%, or even political correctness, wokeness, 39%. So of those things, that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big number, right? Because think about that. We just went through coronavirus. That's down to 36%, right? Very big problem. About a third of the people say that's a big deal. But 55 say violent crime is a very big problem. It beats out race relations, which might have something to do with that, and the economy down at 41%, and then even political correctness, which I thought was by far like 100%. I thought all Americans were outraged about illegal pronouns, but well, what do I know? This article is finishing. We got a couple more here. It says even more striking is the fact that the number of Americans who consider violent crime a very big problem, it rose 6 percentage points over the last month. Republicans, among whom the number increased from 56 to 65%, weren't the only ones contributing to that increase, right? So it's bipartisan is what that's saying. Democrats went up. They think it's a problem. Republicans, theirs went up. They think that's a problem as well. And we've talked about this. We spent some time on this last week where there were a number of different mayors and governors and other, elected officials who were all sort of raising the alarm, ringing the bell saying, hey, we've got some serious problems. And I was even a little bit, irritable with some of these local politicians that they were just suddenly, oh, federal government, come help us. Oh, we can't fix this ourselves. We had the quotes from different mayors from, I think, different parts of, I think it was the southeast Georgia and some of those places saying, no, we're out of luck. There's nothing we can do. We need the federal government. Come help us, please, Joe Biden. Come, they're going to come save us. I'm thinking that's your leadership. That's your local leadership, is just to beg for the feds to come in. Well, then what do we need a mayor for? What do we need a governor for? Just turn it all over to the feds if they're the only ones who can solve your problems. So I get a little bit irritable when that stuff happens. But now I wanted to just sort of pause and show you, it's not just us here on this channel talking about solutions. We've talked a lot about solutions. I've got a whole list of them. I put them in PowerPoint slides and organize them. You can find them over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Now, I wouldn't say that they're all great or they're all the best or they're all the only solution, but we are talking about solutions. And I've been somebody who has been very solution oriented. I hate talking around myself multiple times. And so when this whole thing started, all of this, this criminal justice reform conversation, we were able to sort of identify the concept of the pendulum. The pendulum swings both ways. At one moment, you might say, well, the police need to be defunded until suddenly they are defunded and you start seeing violent crime and suddenly it looks like the pendulum's swinging back the other way and we start to say, well, it's time to refund the police. In fact, Joe Biden's going to make $350 billion that was earmarked for COVID recovery now available to law enforcement. So it sort of sounds like he is funding the police in opposition to many people on the left flank of his party. So we're talking solutions, and other people are as well. Here we've got AOC and Jamaal Bowman over from New York. And so they held a town hall. This was Friday night. You might have missed it, especially if you were here watching the show. But it was on June 25th, 5:30 p.m., and there was some good stuff that came out of it. So I just wanted to sort of share you where this contingent of our political people are. So the description, we've got AOC, Jamaal Bowman. They invite constituents of New York's 14th, 16th districts to a town hall. And why? Because it is Gun Violence Awareness Month, which of course we've talked about the big pivot from the Justice Department to transition into gun violence. We've talked about that all last week, got a lot of videos on that because it's very clear that they're just focused on essentially the guns. Violence with the guns. Okay. So it also says they're going to be taking questions from the attendees. And we have a very good question here about defund the police, and they both answer it. And so we're going to get there. Constituents can contact all of these other people. And of course, it is being translated. So this was sent over on Rep AOC's page, right? So she's got 3.56 subscribers on this YouTube channel, which is respectable, very respectable, 7,000 views. And so, not, nothing earth shattering, but a lot of people are watching this. I think the bigger reason this stuff is important, right? She's not getting, the same amount of views, let's say like a Trump broadcast would get. But what ends up happening, as we have seen, is that this sort of contingent of the Democratic Party makes up this sort of block. And they sort of exert some power, I think, on the narrative that's taking place in the country and largely amongst the Democratic Party. Many people were expecting that Joe Biden would be somebody who is a little bit more centrist, given the fact that he's sort of been a centrist, sort of been somebody who really hasn't done much of anything for the last 30, 40 years or so. And so people were sort of expecting that it would be sort of a kind of middle of the road presidency. But a lot of the policies now that are coming out seem to be like they're more in alignment with that leftist contingent that many people were a little bit concerned about. That's why people like Kamala Harris didn't win the nomination, because Joe Biden was a little bit more centrist. People didn't want that brand of liberalism in America, but looks like maybe things might be trending that direction because Joe Biden has largely proven himself to be kind of an empty vessel. They just kind of cart from room to room and say, here, read this and pick him up and put him over there and move him over here. So going to be a lot more of that. Meanwhile, the people who are actually in charge are steering policy more in their liking, more to their liking. And it's not just me saying that Joe Biden's kind of out there. Joe Rogan, my friends, is out there now, confirmed. That was some other news over the weekend. He came out and said, yeah, we all know he's out of his mind. So that's good, right? More and more people, I think, are waking up to that fact. So we saw here that they had this Zoom proceeding, and this is the host. So this is Brandon. He is asking them questions, sort of, going back and forth, discussing what they're intending to do as leaders of government. And we have Brandon now who asks them this question. And this question is about defunding the police. And it's actually a very good question. I wish they would be a little bit more specific about it, but it is a good question. So we have somebody from Queens who calls in and says, hey, what about specifics? Do you agree, yes or no? How much money and when? What are you going to do and how? Right? All very specific questions. And you're going to hear, as is typical, politicians just sort of beat around the bush on this thing. And they're going to talk about it, or Jamaal Brown's going to talk about it in the version of a reallocation of funds, right? So the person asks about, are you going to defund the police? Which we know tests very poorly. This is not something that the Democrats, as a mainstream party, want to embrace. Joe Biden has never been, as far as I can tell, somebody who's ever supported defunding the police. In fact, it's been exactly the opposite. This was the very point I was making throughout the entirety of the election, that every time the Democrats were mad at the Republicans, calling them racist bigots because they didn't want to, eliminate the police, I was saying, are you whacked, folks? Joe Biden has been the biggest supporter of law enforcement as long as I've been alive. The entire justice system is based around what he has done. And in fact, we played a video on this channel last week from a 1980 panel. He was giving the Democratic response to the State of the Union that was delivered by Bush. And Bush back then was talking about a crime wave. And Biden came out and said, oh, what Bush said, that's nice and all, but we need to triple the budgets. We need to really beef this thing up. So I've never been of the mindset that Joe Biden was pro defund the police. I've always said that he's big government, he's big law enforcement, he wants to throw people in custody. I said for a long time, there is nobody more responsible for more African-American people, men and women, in custody than Joe Biden. And if you want to add a cherry on top, throw Kamala Harris in there too, as Attorney General and as a prosecutor. And so we've got a lot of questions about this, about defunding the police. Jamaal Brown's going to say, no, it's not defunding. We know that's bad because the suburban moms that we need to vote for us, they don't like that word. So we're going to talk about it in the version of, equity. And we're going to talk about specifically, Jamaal Bowman says, it's about a reallocation of funds. Okay, so you mean you're going to take the funds away from law enforcement and give them, that's what we want to know. So we're going to see him kind of squirrel around this issue, but ultimately, I think the takeaway is yes, madam. The answer is affirmative. Yes, we want to defund the police. Let's see what Jamaal Bowman has to say here.
So I'm going to move on to my next question. This is from Jennifer from Riverdale. And Jennifer asks, I'm a big supporter of defunding NYPD, which ties in closely with the need for community safety. Can you both outline your views on defunding the New York City Police Department and be as specific as you can in terms of amount, shifting funds to communities, and et cetera?
Specific.
So I'll go first because Riverdale's in my district. I haven't thought about an amount, but yes, I support the reallocation of resources from NYPD towards more social services.
Defund.
And I think phrasing it that way is important because, as we reimagine and redesign public safety, there is a place for police. I just think we ask them to do way too much. And that's why we see some of the overzealous behaviors and outcomes that are just horrific.
Okay, so it's sort of a labeling thing, right? To be fair to him, he's sort of saying, well, yeah, defund the police is really a reallocation of resources. Now, his justification, his explanation is because we need to create these separate entities that do other functions, right? The police, he said, we ask them to do way too much. I agree with that. We do. There are other situations where I think other people would be better suited to respond to that. I make criticisms about this all the time, that every single traffic stop is not like you're kicking a door in Fallujah in the middle of Iraq in 2003. It's not the same thing, right? We live in a civil society here. We're in Scottsdale, for crying out loud. It's one of the nicest places in the country. And it's very, very hot as well. So, the police, I can understand when it's 120 degrees kind of losing their temper, but we expect them not to do that. We not everything needs to be a catastrophic interaction. So I sort of agree with Bowman on that point. But the other little convenient thing he glosses over is the reason we call it a reallocation of funds and not defund the police is because one is a terrible political slogan that will get you crushed at the polls, and they know that, so they want to run away from it as quickly and as strenuously as they can, and so they're going to do that. So it's again no specifics here. He says, well, I don't have a specific number. So what are you going to do then? What can you come up with one? Can you get us a proposal? You're an elected official. Can you lean on the city council? Can you do something? Or is this person asking the wrong person the question, right? This is a U.S. congressperson. Why is that person not asking their local city council about it? Why are they not asking their mayor about it? Why are they not asking their governor about it, right? Those are all local officials, not federally elected bureaucrats who go to the U.S. Congress and really, make up a small fraction of representation there. It's because they're part of the conversation. These are people who are at the forefront of criminal justice reform, criminal justice issue. They are at the tip of the spear on demanding action. They've been calling for defund the police for a very long time. And so whether or not they have the ability to come up with a plan and give us a hard number on what he wants removed from the NYPD, he really doesn't have much weight there, other than as a political personality, somebody who might have, curry favor with some of the local officials who can't implement change. So that was Jamaal Bowman. Not much else from him there. He turns it over to Rep. AOC, and then she gives us two answers. So the first one, we're going to hear, she kind of does this Kamala Harris routine where she kind of wants to dive into the causes a little bit. We're going to clip it off before that. She does say in her squirrely, roundabout way that she does support reallocating the funds. So we've got two clips from her, one here showing support for reallocating the funds, and then she sort of doubles down on it in a separate clip in between these meandering thoughts. So the first one here, you're going to see that she sort of goes into it about why she supports reallocating the funds. Then you can tell she kind of loses her train of thought and spirals off into this other thing. And then we'll stop there and go to the next clip. So here is AOC.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. And I think, again, one of the reasons why myself or Jamaal may not have a specific number is because of the nature of our work. The city council and the city administration, your city council that we just elected, and our mayoral races, public advocate, our controller who's responsible for a lot of shaping of the city budget, they get into the real nitty gritty on the actual allocation of our city budget and resources. But I agree with Representative Bowman that I do believe that we need to reallocate resources away, and that a big, major causes of this. And by the way, I also think it's important.
Yeah, so she goes into causes, and then she spirals off into like, oh, we got to put this all in context. In 2013, there was a crime wave, but because of the political environment in 2013, we didn't call it a crime wave. We called it a crime suppression or something like that. And what do you, okay. So then she goes into, into that whole deal. But she did say she supports the reallocation of the funds. She said taking away, right? She said that verbatim, taking away from whatever, and taking it from the NYPD and reallocating it to whomever, I guess is the better way to put that. So we've got, kind of 2 for 2 here, and they both support that. And this, the second part of this clip, of course, is she's saying, well, it's not really in my wheelhouse. I don't know. So how much would you defund the police by? I don't know, right? I just tweet about it and put it on Instagram. I have no idea what actually happens after that, but I do support it. So the follow-up would be, then why are you running your mouth then about this? Either one of these people, right? If you're going to be out there talking about all of this reform, and you are in a position of leadership in your local, environment where you can put pressure on people, maybe get into some specifics here, or maybe make some policy proposals that you can implement locally rather than just sort of using this to puff up your profiles on the back of criminal justice reform, get a bunch of people fired up and fervored up about defunding the police, and then have no intention of ever actually being able to implement that. Why? Because as you heard AOC, well, I'm not the comptroller, I'm not the city council, I'm not the mayor, I'm not the people that you just elected. They're the ones responsible for doing that stuff. I just get out here on Instagram and run my mouth about defunding the police, and I still support it though. But when it comes to the numbers and the nitty gritty, I really don't know. So I mean, like, I don't know, a couple they're going to be the ones who have to deal with the consequences. They have to actually do the work. They got to go defund the police and then deal with the spillover, the crime that it causes, the lack of officers. We're seeing that, hiring numbers are terrible across the board. On our Zoom meetup, we heard the same story from many people saying that public servants in general, right? Firefighters, nurses, other people who are sort of kind of being dumped on by society for being, racist or bigots or whatever. They're just kind of getting tired of the name calling. They're kind of tired of being unappreciated. And then AOC comes out and says, well, we're just going to defund them because of, systemic racism. And you all of you people that my policies are going to affect, I don't know, you work out the details amongst yourself. I can't be bothered with that. I'm just going to get back on here and keep, railing about defunding the police, and I'm going to leave everybody else who lines up behind me to support me hanging out to dry because I have no intention of doing anything. That really sets back justice reform, because people get exhausted by believing in somebody, by believing in politicians who deliver nothing, promise a bunch of stuff, and then when they get asked a hard question, oh, you do support defund the police, you're going to call it a reallocation of funds. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt. So how much of those funds, how would you like to reallocate from the NYPD? You're out here talking about it. If you're going to make the proposition, you've got to defend it. If I'm going to make an argument in court, I've got to defend it. I don't get to go in front of a judge and say, hey, Your Honor, I think this is a good legal argument. And he says, okay, well, what's the basis for that? Give me a citation, or what's your authority for that? And I say, well, Judge, that's it's not really my business. My law clerk gets into the nitty gritty on all of that stuff. And so I'm going to have to refer you to them. Here's the phone number. They work at the firm. Call them. They'll handle it. Are you kidding? No way, right? I'd be laughed out of there for good reason, because it's a stupid way to think that things can function. If you're going to be making an argument, you got to defend it. They're sitting here telling us to defund the police, but if it's an actual detail, then all we're going to do is talk about it. I'm going to kick the rest of that down to the city council. So that's what you get from these two. Headlines now about surging and surging and surging. We're going to hear AOC talk about. So here she says, more context for you. So it's surging. It's very, very, very much a crime wave. And that sounds like a bunch of hysteria. In fact, that's not reality. And as I mentioned previously, she just sort of came out of this conversation about 2013 and saying that we had the same numbers of something in 2013 and they match the numbers now. And so in 2013, when we had the same numbers, the context was telling us that it was actually a good situation because it was different. And now it's the same numbers, but it's being reported as a bad situation. Something like that, right? Pretty close, frankly. Now, here we've got AOC talking about this, and then she's sort of saying, well, it's only a surge, it's only a crime surge because we were locked down. I mean, if we wouldn't have been locked down, there wouldn't have been a surge, and so the numbers will sort of equalize a little bit. Kind of like, I think she's talking about like inflation, like crime inflation almost, where we saw like big spikes in lumber and all these other things. I mean, maybe she is a brilliant economist after all. So maybe she's onto something there. Let's listen to what she says here before she doubles down on talking about reallocating the police.
And so the reason we're seeing these headlines about how it's surging and surging and surging is because during the pandemic, everyone was locked inside. And in fact, there were other kinds of reporting that surged during the pandemic, like domestic violence. But because those don't grab the same headlines as other forms of violence, we are seeing these headlines about percentage increases. Now, I want to say that any amount of harm is unacceptable and too much. But I also want to make sure that this hysteria, that this doesn't drive a hysteria, and that we look at these numbers in context so that we can make responsible decisions about what to allocate in that context. Now, that being said, I do agree that we do need to reallocate those resources into the things like mental health supports, and programs like the Stand Up to Violence program. The fact that the NYPD currently has.
All right, we're gonna bail on that because she just goes off. So she's actually getting pretty dang good at being a politician who says nothing, right? She talks about allocations, which is sort of the word of the day. It's not defunding, it's allocations, but everything else she's kind of going on. It's sort of, it's not really the problem. Let me reframe the problem for you. A lot of politicians do this. It's a reframe. You ask them a question. You say, hey, this is a clear problem. Hey, crime seems to be up right now. You're talking about defunding the police. Do you still stand by that? That was the original question. What is your plan for defunding the police? And she says, well, let me put this in context for you, and then talks about other things that aren't the original problem. You're going to talk about the context. Okay, what about the problem? Well, the problem's important, but also the context. And we don't want to get crazy, by the way. If you it's all surging and there's a lot of hysteria around here. And so what I want to do is create a program. a program. And let's talk about another old program like the NYPD, and we'll talk about some other problems with their program. So like nothing was said there. She's getting good at it, and it sounded kind of a little bit more competent than usual. So we might see her elected president here in 2024 whenever she turns 35. That will be a good day, won't it? All right, let's continue on now. So we know that AOC, we also know that Jamaal Bowman and most of these other politicians are not going to be solving much of anything. Is there any other solution here? Can we maybe do an audit of our Justice Department? Can we take a deep dive? Can we go and investigate what some of these other problems are? Because AOC says, oh, it's not our problem. We just want to defund the police. Go talk to the actual people who have to do it. If you want to get some specifics, some details, go talk to the mayor, go talk to the police chief, go talk to the city council, whatever. Leave us alone, all right? Don't DM me either. So now the question is, who's responsible for this? Who's going to come fix this thing? We know that a lot of this stuff arguably is sort of caused by a lot of the government malfeasance, but how do we fix this? Who's responsible for this? If the government causes the problem, well, then they just get to use government to fix the problem. And so we have this like little self-perpetuating machine of grift that exists in our federal government. And so very recently, surprisingly, they actually investigated themselves and they found that they're unprepared. How about that? The Inspector General says that very recently that auditors say that there would be challenges with body cameras due to implementation and inexperience problems. Okay, so the Justice Department is now thinking about equipping its officers, but the IG says, no, we can't do that. So the IG is the Inspector General. Let's take a look at this article. So the Justice Department is currently preparing to launch a body camera policy for law enforcement officers across its components. And remember, we talked about this earlier. In fact, it's right here. Lisa Monaco, she issued a new policy talking about some of these reforms. We spent a lot of time on this. I know it can sort of feel like beating a dead horse here at some times, but we're in a new administration. The Biden administration is 5 months in, and we've got 3.5 more years of this. So now we're asking ourselves, what are their policy changes going to look like as they start, unrolling economic policies and international security policies or justice policies? What are they? And so we want to make sure that we're investigating these with some depth. And we've been going through them. And Lisa Monaco, the Assistant Attorney General, down to Merrick Garland, has indicated that they want more body cameras to be deployed because, as we've said here before, I don't know why it's not even a mandatory thing. It's 2021. My phone has like 6 cameras on it. So why can't the police wear one just to make sure that they're following the rules and really to protect them in the event that a suspect or a defendant or somebody who is on the other end of the law claims that they did something wrong? Well, it's very simple. They can just go pull up the tape. We've got the tape. Nope, looks pretty clear. So it's almost like a liability shield for the good officers, and it exposes some of the bad officers, which is really what I'm interested in. So it's 2021. Our Justice Department apparently, body cameras. Maybe we should start looking into this. They bring in an Inspector General, somebody who's supposed to come in and kind of do this independent audit, right? Because you don't want government bureaucracies to investigate themselves. That's not good because they find that they did nothing wrong and that we're perfectly prepared for everything, or like we don't need it, right? So if the Justice Department investigated itself for body cameras, oh no, we're perfect. We don't actually even need them. Thanks for asking. So they bring in the IG. He says they're not even like ready for it, not even close. So we've got justice components like FBI, ATF, U.S. Marshals, DEA, says they have virtually no direct experience with body-worn cameras, said the Inspector General, nor do they have any policies for their use or implementation plans. Okay, no, we don't use them. We're not going to use them. We're not planning on using them in 2021 from our Justice Department. This is from the same people that have been hemming and hawing for years about justice reform. Nobody's even really thinking about it, is what this is saying. Now, to be fair, they are now, right? Lisa Monaco and the AG from the new Biden administration now thinking about this stuff. But let's see if we can get it done. So earlier this month, while the IG was finalizing its report, Deputy AG Lisa Monaco issued a new policy requiring cameras for law enforcement officers engaged in executing search warrants and making pre-planned arrests. So if you are somebody who's an officer doing one of those two things, you got to wear a body camera. That is the new policy. But the Inspector General went in and said, over the course of the audit, we found that the components were generally unprepared to implement. So a new policy comes out, got to wear body cameras if you're one of those officers. IG says, they can't, like they're not ready. Like we actually can't give them to them or something. And we're going to dive into what the problems are here, of course. But it says that the Inspector General, once they did their audit, they came back to the Justice Department and they extolled the benefits of implementing such a program. They said it's going to boost transparency. It's going to boost accountability. We talk about that every day on the show, accountability and transparency among federal law enforcement. It could help the department during investigations, it added, including when probing allegations of excessive force or other constitutional violations by officers, like the crackdown on the protesters outside the White House, right? Hello, we just went through that. We had this whole hoax where they were saying that Donald Trump and his egomaniacal law enforcement, brown shirts were out there just clearing people out of the courtyard. Never happened. What happened? What would the story have been? And maybe if all of those U.S. Marshals and all of those other federal agents out there had been wearing body cameras, and maybe somebody could do a FOIA request or get access to those things, and we could see what happened there. But they just don't wear them. Federal agents themselves, they say, the IG says, could benefit from the cameras to combat false allegations. Yes. But justice officials, they agreed with those benefits, but they also suggested that the associated costs would be significant. And they noted that, federal officers, they don't interact with the public as often as state and local counterparts. So, yes, thank you, IG. We appreciate your suggestion here for the body cameras. You're right. It would have been helpful for the White House Lafayette Park little debacle. Would have been helpful, for some of these other incidents. But also, you got to keep in mind, like, it's going to cost a lot of money. Like, we're the Justice Department here. We're on a tight budget here. We don't just throw money around haphazardly like to the FBI, DEA, CIA, all of them. It's a tight budget here. So there's no way that we could ask for another few $1,000,000 to equip all of our officers with body cameras. That's like way too expensive. In fact, I'm not even going to give you the form that you need to fill out that request. So it's just too much. We can't afford it. We're the federal government. So thanks for playing. Yeah, that's nice, right? And we also don't even interact with the public anyways. It's expensive and it wouldn't do any good because we don't actually interact with anybody. But they made 90,000 arrests in 2019 and they discharged their firearms in 121 incidents between 2018 and 2020. So something like, 60, 40, depending on how they split that up, right? A lot of shootings, a lot of discharges, a lot of arrests, 90,000 between 1 year, 90,000 arrests 1 year alone. So maybe would be useful. Maybe they do, in fact, interact with the public. But I forgot how expensive it is. They can't afford it. Justice Department's on a tight ship over there. That implementation also could take time, the IG warned, right? So if we do, let's say, Justice Department were able to overcome your burdens. You're concerned, overcome your maybe roadblocks for body cameras. It's a little too expensive. That's okay. We'll pay for it. No problem. How much money do we pay out on a regular basis to settle claims? A lot more than what it would cost to equip these people. So how about that? We'll cover the cost. And it does look like you implement officers. So you agree? You do interact with 90,000 arrests. You do agree with that? So how about we go ahead and implement this plan? Can you get started on that? The IG says, yeah, it's going to take time. But probably saying that maybe a 1-year pilot program would be useful. Recommended that, says it's going to help the justice develop the related policies. But even that timeline could be unrealistic. So a 1-year pilot program can't do it. ATF officials, they estimated it would take the agency 2 years to stand up a body camera program, telling the IG we have no infrastructure, such as physical, technical, or storage-wise to implement. We would be building from the ground up, says that poor poor ATF official, just totally confused, has no idea what's happening. Where are we? What's going on? We had no physicals, no technical, no storage to implement any of this. We need 2 years to get this done. And listen, I get it, right? There's a lot that goes on when you're trying to steer a ship as big as one of these federal bureaucracies, right? They've got a lot of useless things that they got to turn around and start steering and moving. It takes a lot of work. And to ask somebody to like implement a new policy, oh my gosh, a body camera for every officer? No, that's impossible. We can't do that even. No, we're the federal. It's not possible. We can't do that. We can't really get much of anything done. So if you want us to kick this around for like 4 or 5 years and make this cost about 100 times more than it actually should, that we can do. That is on my job description. So I'm happy to take that and run with it. But right now it's just like, well, okay, I guess 2 years from now in 2023, in 2021, it takes us 2 years to put this phone, my friends, 5 cameras here, 1 up here, 6 cameras on this phone. And you can just, they can't equip that here or somewhere on their body right here. I know that there are some additional, right, contracts. You've got learning how to strap them on, right? You've got charging and all sorts of really complicated things. So 2 years, you're right, that sounds short. Probably should make it like 10, probably a decade, and then they'll be ready to go. So hats off to the Justice Department for really putting their money where their mouth is on, and even simply getting something as asinine as a body camera that should be very, very basic and rudimentary. 2 years for that. So hold on for more of that. All right. And last week we talked about some other version of justice that was taking place last week, talking about Derek Chauvin. So there was a sentencing that took place on Friday. We learned that Derek Chauvin is going to be charged or convicted, sentenced to 22 and a half years in custody. And I was very curious about what some of this reaction would be. Is this the moment, the turning point, right? Was this justice? For a long time, it felt like the entire country was sort of hanging their hat on this. Derek Chauvin and George Floyd essentially became symbolic of the problematic interface between law and society right out in front of us for all of us to see. And maybe that this would sort of, symbolically heal a wound in America because there was a conviction and justice was done, and we're going to be able to move on from this thing, or is everybody going to be happy now, or what? And obviously the answer to that was no, right? Clearly no. And I said that was probably going to be strategically what Judge Cahill did. In a good compromise, both parties leave dissatisfied, right? Larry David, the brilliant scholar, said that at some point. So, this is something where I think both sides were unhappy, right? Anybody who thought that Chauvin was wrongfully convicted is going to be unhappy with any sentence. Anybody who thinks that Chauvin was, sort of a malicious, heinous murderer thought that he should have gotten the maximum 30 or even 40 years, some people are saying. And so this was sort of right in the middle. 22 and a half, you split it. Both sides are angry, but and I get that it was a volatile case, but what does this mean for justice reform? As a movement, the George Floyd case kind of started it all, right? We were all unified for a short, brief second in what we saw. We all wanted some change. We all wanted to be a part of the change. And the question is, have we gotten there yet? Let's check in with Minnesota Attorney General. He was there. Minnesota Attorney General goes by the name of Keith Ellison, said on Friday that Chauvin's sentencing, like his conviction, is not justice. Oh, but another moment of real accountability on the road to justice. Okay. So I guess we're getting started. He says, today is also an important moment for our country. The outcome of this case is critically important, he says. But by myself, it's not enough. He added before saying that concrete change must come through legislative action at the local, state, and federal levels. Okay, we're going to be seeing major calls for some of this. Now, I call on leaders, he says, and members of Congress to pass the best and strongest version of this bill that can be passed, and to pass it now. He said, pointing out that President Biden himself urged lawmakers to pass sweeping police reform legislation. I clipped the wrong paragraph there. He's talking about the George Floyd bill. He's saying that one needs to be passed. He says it must be passed. Lives are depending on it. It's just that simple. But the House, they passed this bill. It's called the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which was introduced by Karen Bass over from California. And this was, let's see, introduced twice since Floyd's death in May, most recently in March of this year. Right? So it's been introduced twice, which I didn't realize. I thought it had only been introduced one time. The legislation would implement sweeping changes to how policing is carried out in the country. It was spurred by the now viral video of Chauvin restraining Floyd. However, the legislation did not gain support from the GOP House members, and Bass has been conducting ongoing negotiations with Senators Tim Scott and Cory Booker over a bipartisan Senate version of the bill. Negotiators announced on Thursday that they had reached a bipartisan agreement, though they said in a statement that there is still more work to be done on the final bill. Nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to, the lawmakers said. Over the next few weeks, we look forward to continuing our work towards getting a finalized proposal across the finish line. So it has been over a year since George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin, and still no George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. This was something that Joe Biden is pretty clear on this. He wanted it passed by May 25th of this year. In fact, according to The Independent, he wanted it done and signed by the anniversary of George Floyd's death. Lawmakers now debate on how to hold officers accountable. So this article, you'll recall, back from May 24th, right? One day before the 25th of May deadline, says Congress won't meet Joe Biden's deadline for getting critical police reform on his desk. Bipartisan group of lawmakers continue to debate how to hold officers accountable, right? This was back in May. And so if you'll notice back over here, they're still doing the debating. So now it's still June and almost July. We're on the verge of July and they're still debating. So the president set a deadline of May 25th, 1 year after the killing of George Floyd, galvanizing demand for justice and so on across the country. So, are we hopeful that there's going to be any actual justice reform, or is this sort of the beginning of the long sweep under the rug? Oh, okay. Well, we just milked this justice debacle for everything that it's worth. We're going to, elect new politicians and make this the backbone of our campaign, but nothing really is going to change, right? We're just going to kind of keep things status quo. Derek Chauvin's been convicted now, so we can all kind of forget about him. Just kind of throw him back there in that corner, and we'll just keep kicking this George Floyd policing bill around, another month, before we know it. Oh, it's another issue. Somebody else is killed, or there's something else that's happening in our justice system that merits our attention, and we sort of all just pivot. Right. And that's what these politicians do. That's what these bureaucrats do. Meanwhile, good people are suffering at the hands of a broken justice system. And it is very difficult to see it continually happen while politicians get up and talk about it and then do nothing in response. Not useful leadership, in my opinion. But we're going to continue to do our part on the ground. As you know, I am a criminal defense lawyer. We've got an entire team of amazing people at our law firm that are dedicated to helping good people facing criminal charges. These types of charges and many others I can share with you. Of course, I'm talking about drug charges, traffic violations, felony charges, DUI violations, anything and everything in between. Our phone number is 480-787-0394. If you or somebody you know or love needs some help with an offense in the state of Arizona, we'd be very happy to help. We have a whole team of people here. We're dedicated to helping good people facing criminal charges find safety, clarity, and hope in their cases, and beyond that, in their lives. So if you need any help with that, you know where to find us. If you don't need any help with that, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the law, of course, I want to invite you over to check out my Gumroad channel here. This is gumroad.com/Robert Gruler. There are some interesting things that you can buy and download and participate in if you're interested, in particular talking about this one here. Law Enforcement Interaction Training, which is a 2.5-hour course. It's a recorded seminar that we did with our Locals community. If you're a member at Locals, go to Locals before you go over to Gumroad, but before you sign up over there. But if you don't want to be a supporter at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, gumroad.com/Robert Gruler is the place to be. And that is it for me on this episode, my friends. Thank you for spending your time with me. I will see you right back here on the next one.